our mission today, very different. This is a really short slide deck because of it. It was a pleasure to do. The mission today is to answer your questions. So what I'm hoping you can do is either speak up or that you can type your questions into the chat window, and what we'll do is try and clarify them for everybody's sake, and I'll try and answer them for you. Again, ideally pertaining to the last webinars, but as I said, if you've got suggestions for future ones, that would be great as well. So firstly, to answer your questions, and then secondly, to tell stories. So what I'll try and do is relate these to real world examples. So if you've got a real world question for me, that's fantastic. And if not, what I'll do is I'll try and speak to some of the pieces that were left unsaid in the two webinars, probably that matter the most to us, which was the one on lines and the one on working remotely. So what I've done is I've taken some questions that I received from in-office people who watched the webinar, as well as customers like yourselves or prospectives, and I've tried to sort of summarize them, and I've got some tales to tell around them. So if it turns out that nobody has any questions at all, we've still got things to say. All right, so in working, moving right along then, I'm taking a look over here. I don't see any questions so far, but again, please go ahead and either speak up or type them in your chat window there. So the topics that we covered so far were lines, what they are and how to save on them, and then working remotely simply and on a budget. And so I wanted to talk about a couple of these things. So first of all, as it pertains to lines, how do you determine what kind of lines you're eligible for? That's kind of a funny way to put it, but I guess I mean it in every sense of the word eligible. As a company, as a business where I'm located out in rural Ontario, there are only so many things I can do. For example, I'm not eligible for a PRI. There would be no way to get one from my telephone company. I'm eligible for analog lines. And some would argue that I'm not eligible for, say, SIP lines, because I don't have a hardwired internet into my building. Instead, I have wireless. But I'd argue that the reliability of the wireless is good enough that there's no reason why you couldn't have SIP lines. And so anyway, we'll discuss that real quickly. And then inexpensive ways to have resilient lines strategy at your company. So I think that one of the confusions when it comes to lines is really not just so much what they're used for, but isn't it expensive to have backup lines and so forth? And that would have been true at one point, but it's not really true today. And because of new technologies, I don't feel that it's all that expensive to add that level of resilience. I don't think that people need the resilience that or the level of resilience that they think they do. So first of all, okay, so I do have a question here. Hassan says, I missed the last webinar. Is there a link available? There is. It's on our website, I believe, and certainly our marketing person has it as well. So what I'll do, Hassan, is I'll actually ask them. They would have you in the list of recipients that they sent this notification out to. So what we can do is ask them to kindly send one to you. But I do believe that the link is that there's a link to it on our website. So with regards, again, back to lines, how do I determine what kind of lines I'm eligible for? You know what, you're probably honestly best to let somebody else do that work for you. I would ask my account representative to do the work and say, hey, listen, I've heard of PRI. Am I eligible for that? I happen to be in Bolton, or I'm in, wherever the case is. I'm not downtown Toronto. Am I even eligible for that? And what they can do is they call the telephone companies. So they call Bell Canada, Allstream, and the usual people who can deliver the lines, the actual physical copper, and they find out if they have a CO, a central office, near enough by to provide that level of service. And then they quote you a price on it. Do you pay more than people downtown? Absolutely you do, because there's more, there's a higher cost for them delivering that line, really is what it boils down to. So, but is it significant? It's usually around $100 a month or $50 a month. So not really in the grand scheme of things, but nonetheless, you would ask to find out if you're eligible. If you have internet, this is a bold statement, but if you have internet, you're eligible for SIP lines. So I mean, even if it was just LTE, so if it was a GSM phone's internet, really you're eligible for SIP lines. The question is, how good are they going to sound? Right? They might not sound very good at all if you've got large amounts of latency or an inconsistent signal. So there's some considerations there, but again, I think in most cases, So sort of going to point number 2 with regards to resilient lines, most cases, if I had, let's say a very small company, say 4 analog lines or something like that in rural Ontario where I am, and then I decided that I wanted to add some capabilities that I couldn't get on analog lines. And I also wanted to sort of introduce a resilience plan in case somebody was to dig up the lines out front, or in case an ice storm took down the telephone lines out front. Then I could look at something like internet, given that, again, I'm wireless, could look at internet as a nice media to do that and not depend on it for every single phone call, but rather just for the phone calls when I'm in resilient mode, when I'm already damaged. So that's one thing to consider. And that's, I guess, why I say there are inexpensive ways to have resilient line strategies, because SIP lines, for example, are so inexpensive, being around $20, $25 a line, right? So not very expensive per channel. The other thing is, just like life insurance, don't overinsure yourself. So you don't need millions of dollars when you go. You probably need enough to pay for your house and pay for your funeral and cover some kids' education. Maybe that adds up to $1 million, but maybe it doesn't. So the point just being, insure yourself for what you need. If you think, for example, that your business can lumber along with 2 lines in the case that all the other lines, your main lines, are taken down, maybe you've got a PRI now with 23 channels, you figure, 10 people, 15 people at a time are on the phone. But honestly, if we told everybody, look, get off the phones and let's leave them only for inbound calls, I'll bet you we would only need 3 calls or 3 concurrent calls at a time. So really, that's, to my way of looking at it, that's your lowest sort of common denominator. That's the lowest that you want to aim to, right? So you probably don't, like I say, need to go as crazy as maybe you thought you did. I see a question here, so let me just pop this stuff in as it comes along, and we'll just fill up the time. Gina says to us, when I'm working remotely, connected to my office computer, I lose the connection and have to log in again. What would be the cause? How could we avoid this? Gina, what technology are you using to connect to your office computer? Is it like LogMeIn or some sort of a remote program, or any sense there of what it might be? Or did you mean telephone-wise, your remote program? Okay, so it's something like a LogMeIn. Well, you know what? I got a lot of experience with that. I work with these things all the time. You know what? You got to figure out what it is. It could be the computer itself. Maybe the computer is programmed that it's allowed to go to sleep. Maybe it has energy saving mode on the network card. I'm just thinking, as a technician here of many years, I would start with one end of the spectrum and then go all the way to the other. So I'm thinking physically, that box itself, could it possibly be at fault? Is there, this is more complicated, but is there a corporate firewall that could be shutting it down once in a while? It's really unlikely, but could that be the case? Is the bandwidth at your company so consumed that occasionally, even streaming, your desktop, which is actually, by the way, very, very low traffic, but maybe even that's getting swamped? And if not, could it be back at your house? So at your house, do you have something like a Rogers Lite internet connection, or something that's fairly inconsistent and fairly low bandwidth? And then what's happening downstairs in your house or outside of your office in your house? Do you have kids using Netflix, or kids using streaming services? Are there things running on your computer synchronizing, such as Dropbox or file synchronization programs? Are there things that could be taking your bandwidth up without you knowing it, causing momentary outages? Generally speaking, those programs, those remote desktop type programs, they have a certain amount of time before they give up on you and the screen freezes or shows you a reconnect icon or something. Generally, it's several seconds too. I mean, things need to be very bad between you and that computer for usually longer than 10 seconds before it will give up. So again, I without knowing the exact technology you're using and what your setup is, I'm just trying to give you some ideas. That's where I would check. I would actually suspect bandwidth and firewall above the rest. But the first thing I would check is that PC, because we have, as a company, Digitcom supports a lot of people remotely. In fact, I think we have 2,000 or 3,000 different remote computers at customers' locations. They work flawlessly, really they do. But that's because they're set up to a template. So we hand the person who sets that computer up a template that says, shut off the auto go to sleep settings, shut off the firewall on that machine, or permit applications through it, so on and so forth, to make sure that those types of avoidable things don't happen. From Danilo, so we got IP Office R10, so it's an Avaya customer. We have some remote workers. All of them have designed teleworker, or sorry, have designated teleworker license. End users want to have something simple in the form of, their mobile devices, like an app they can use without having to connect to the VPN. For sure, the incoming outgoing phone calls will work like WhatsApp or Skype. Also, it must be light in data consumption. Wow, you want it all, don't you, Danilo? End users must have the capacity to enable or disable the app only during the working schedule. Well, isn't that handy? So IP Office does have something like that, Danilo. So, and they did as of, I don't know, maybe IP Office version 7 or 8, something like that. So they have IP Office 1X Mobile Edition. And I'll bet you I don't have it on my phone to show you right now, because I'm actually using mainly Equinox right now. So, and in either case, so let's just talk about both of those. And they don't really relate to these webinars because the last 2 webinars haven't really dealt with that level of technology. But Danilo, I will do a webinar on the high-tech answer to working, remotely. So I will talk about this. So let me tell you in vague terms, let me, give you something to chew on for a little bit. So 2 words, right? Equinox and 1X Mobile. I guess that's 3 words. So 1X Mobile is the name of the one product and Equinox is the name of the other. They're both Avaya products. They both incidentally work with release 10, I believe. Most definitely 1X Mobile does. Both of them are like a soft phone. So Equinox is just a soft phone, period, and it does run on your mobile phone. Mobile 1X or 1X Mobile app is maybe it's more resilient in the respect that it's more flexible. It runs as a soft phone if you want it to, and it can also run as just call control. So what I mean by that is you can go into the app as if it was going to be a VoIP call and place the call, and it'll actually get the office to call you, and then it calls out, right? So you're using GSM, and why that's kind of handy is, again, when you're kind of in the Northern Ontario setting, right? Where you're outside of good connectivity and you can't depend on the VoIP quality. It also meets your requirement of being light in data consumption, because if it's not doing the voice over IP, it's most definitely light in data consumption. But in general, the voice over IP stuff, we're talking G729 is likely what you'll be running on a soft phone application, and that's 8K. So that's 8K BPS. Now, can it run without a VPN? Oh, gosh, anything can run without a VPN, but do you want to run it without a VPN? So you got to ask yourself, is the security of my traffic between this device, between me talking in it and getting to the destination party, is that important? So depending on the line of work you're in, it might be really important. For myself, for example, it wouldn't be important at all, to be honest with you. Because I don't talk about anything confidential enough that it couldn't be, chewed up by the internet at some point or snooped or something, I wouldn't, it wouldn't be a big consideration for me. But nonetheless, you can do it. Most certainly, you can port forward. You can set up all kinds of different methods of doing it, or VPN straight to your office so there's no waypoint. There are a number of different ways. So I hope that kind of answers your question. So Gina says, so same Gina, very, very good. Even when I'm at home during the day, it still happens. But I check the bandwidth and firewall, or sorry, I'll check the bandwidth and firewall when I'm back at the office. This is one of those cases, Gina, where if you want to solve a problem like this, and I would say just as a guy who solves problems for a living and has for a long time, I'm a friendly person anyway, but I'd say make really good friends with your IT people. Let them work on this with you in your idle time slots when it's, when you're not in a crunch and they're not in a crunch. And then again, like I said, draw a picture of your desktop at your house and what your infrastructure sort of looks like. It goes to a wired cable, or maybe it's wireless. Maybe it's a wireless laptop running wireless. I'll tell you right now, incidentally, Gina, without a word of a lie, my laptop that I'm looking at behind this monitor right now, my laptop, I think has a faulty wireless card. I say I think because at my office here at home, I plug it in, like I plug in a RJ45 connection. It's all hardwired down to my router in my basement. But when I go on the road, when I go to the Digitcom office and I'm set up in one of the conference rooms there, I find that the internet just doesn't work. And I mean, they've got crazy internet at the office. So it's certainly my machine. I think it's my wireless. which means I do drop the odd remote connection. It means if I take a VoIP call at all on my wireless, it doesn't work very well. Is it rectifiable? Sure it is. All I need to do is buy one of those really cheap little wireless cards, or I could get a new laptop, but I don't think that'll fly. So, you know, it's rectifiable. Truth is, it really doesn't affect me, so I don't care. But it's just one example of where the problem could be. So like I said, draw yourself a picture and kind of work with your IT people, because once the picture makes it all the way through the cloud to the office and hits their router, from there on in, you know, you're at their mercy as far as their spare cycles to help you kind of determine where this is. The good news is, I'll say this, Gina, that if you were in the office and you were using that technology, it will likely work perfectly, which just goes to show that there's something between, you know, again, your office and your home. Maybe bring in your laptop, if it is a laptop, bring in whatever the device is and let it run, again, if it's wireless, on a different connection, and see if it works any better. If you get the same problems, might be a problem like my laptop, where it's actually the darn wireless card. So Danilo, do you have to buy additional licenses to have 1X mobile? You do, sort of. You may have them already. You either need a power user, Danilo, or you need a mobile worker. I think they called it two different things: mobile worker and teleworker, depending on what version of software you've got and whatever. Which, if you think that's confusing, imagine the poor sales guys, right? So it was the same part number, I think, but Avaya changed the terminology of it. Essentially what it did was it gave you the permission to run any of the remote packages that Avaya had. So it gave you 1X portal, the one that we looked at very briefly in the remote working on a budget session. And it gives you the 1X mobile to run the soft phone in it. So that being the big difference. So, so hopefully that answers it for you. Okay, so back to working remotely, a nice little segue. So simply, pardon me, and on a budget. I wanted to talk about different cases, because I know I went through and I said, so here are people, I've done a couple remote sessions, so they've kind of melded together in my own brain. The one session was early on, before we began the bi-weekly thing, where it wasn't on a budget per se, but it was just a discussion. It is available, by the way, online. As well. It's posted on our website or on Digitcom's YouTube channel for sure. I think it was pretty informative. It was 45 minutes or an hour. It was a little longer. And it was with regards to the characteristics of a remote worker, about not so much the lifestyle, but essentially what jobs work well remotely and which ones maybe don't, and what kind of personality styles work and which ones don't, which habits work well and which ones don't, that sort of thing. And so I'm trying to draw a line between what I said in one and what I said in the other. One of the things that I made kind of clear, certainly in the first one, the larger of the two, was that your job had to be conducive to it. So of course, if you're the president of a company, it's likely actually conducive to working remotely. It likely works fairly well. If you're a high-level manager where you have few reports and all those reports need to be hands-on with all of their reports, of course it works very well. And that kind of goes without saying. If you're transactional, if you go away, perform a task, and then provide outcomes, and you don't work very collaboratively, of course it works very well, right? So that kind of goes without saying. But I wanted to talk about a couple of sort of case studies, if you will, because I think that we shortchanged some of the other things that maybe you weren't thinking about. So, for example, AR clerks. So accounts receivable clerks. Right now, Digitcom has an AR clerk that is it's not even in Canada right now. So they live, like they work directly for Digitcom and so on, but they live abroad. And what's impressive about it, as it just so happens, it's South America. So which is pretty cool, because it means that the time zones are fairly well aligned. So that works very well. But what's interesting about it is, if you think about what an AR person does, they need to be collaborative. They need to report on their activities. They need good dial tone, needs to be reliable. And we want it showing the company phone number when they call out. And we want those calls recorded and things like that, like all the kind of things that we would want to do for an accounts receivable clerk in-house, we want to be able to do for one remotely. Can you do that? Well, yeah, most certainly. In fact, this person is working exactly how we talked about it, except it's a bit of a combination. It kind of goes into what Danilo's talking about, because they're using 1X Mobile Edition. So their internet is one connection for their computer, and that takes care of the notes and so forth. They can put it in our corporate CRM. They can make up reports in there. They can report on their activities in there for their manager, all that kind of stuff. Great. And do any collaborative stuff that they need to do. But then as far as the actual mechanism of the phone calls go, they have 1X Mobile Edition. Now they could have used like another one of Digitcom's clerks, and this person's not an AR. I don't know what their title is. It doesn't really matter, but they're in Saskatchewan and they haven't been to the office in over a year right now. So again, these are as real life as you get. They're with Digitcom themselves. So again, completely devoted person, 40 hours a week, sitting at her desk in Saskatchewan rather than here, and performing whatever tasks that are again reportable by Digitcom. Now, the internet's different there. So the internet allows it at this moment. In fact, I think she's using a mobile phone and using 1X Portal. So precisely what we talked about in the last session, which was working remotely on the cheap, which was 1X Portal is very inexpensive. The teleworker license is fairly inexpensive. And so she's got, every time she places a phone call through 1X, it calls her phone. Fantastic. Again, it's reportable through our system. It is through our system. It's recordable if that's something that we wanted to do, and the whole thing. So point just being that positions that you maybe never thought of. Now, call center agents, you know, most of the call centers that I see out there, the more modern call centers that are there, that are out there right now, I wouldn't say most, that's probably overstating it, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% or very close to it, actually contain one or more remote agents. In some cases, all of them are remote. So why would we take everybody, hire only local help, hire only local resources who are good enough with customers, and ask them all to drive to this one location each day and fight through traffic and TTC and so on and so forth, so that they can sit down, so that we can try and put up barricades in between them and pad the barricades so that you can't hear the other people, so that it doesn't sound like a call center. So that we can set all those things up when we could have, we would have a much larger labor pool if we could resource people all over the place. So all over, in our case, our province, country, even in other countries. If anything, it just becomes a challenge for your HR and your what am I looking for? Your accounting staff who does payroll, because with visas and taxes and so forth, it can't be easy employing people in other nations. But the point is, you can have an A team. You can have a dream team now of people working for your company all over the place. So there are some models. I was trying to think of a couple of them offhand. I think Yelp was one of them, but there are a number of different companies, like big name companies, that are completely remote. So they never had a headquarters. Some of them still don't have a headquarters, and they're large companies. Point just being that there aren't too many jobs these days that you can't do remotely. That's a double negative. As I said before, if you really need to be super hands-on with people, if you need to be hands-on with something tangible, so you need to be in a warehouse stocking things, you need to be on an assembly line putting things together, those things still need to be done by hands, right? So I respect that. You definitely, that's not conducive to working at home. But otherwise, like I said, there are many cases in which people are working remotely that you may not have even thought of, because you're just expecting that it's only certain transitional or transactional people, or people of a high enough management level that they don't engage somebody every day. So, and what I'd suggest you do in that light is, if you can, go back to that webinar. So not that mine is the be all end all webinar of working remotely, not at all. It was just a very practical, off the cuff, true to myself type, webinar. It didn't examine all the nuances. If I was redoing it, or if somebody gave me another hour to talk about it, I would probably talk about the importance of collaborating with your remote staff. So the importance of actually getting together weekly and doing a one-on-one, doing a bit of a check-in to see how that person's tasks are going. The importance of having those people come to corporate events now and again, bring them in, make sure that they get to the odd, pizza party that you have monthly, make that almost a requirement, because it keeps them engaged and personal with people. And then the last thing, and I think I did make that point in that webinar, was because you don't run into each other at the water cooler, means your remote person is actually extremely efficient, because they're just not interrupted very much. So they're very efficient. So at the end of the day, if they want to spend 5 minutes or so chatting with each person they call in a day, making small talk at the beginning of it, To my way of looking at it, that should be encouraged as well, because that replaces the water cooler, right? We don't have the water cooler anymore because we work too far away. Okay, so see another question. What is your suggestion for the small business? VJ, you're gonna have to give me a little bit more than that, but I probably have 10 suggestions. Let's not overstate it. I'll give you 3. Can you clarify what you mean? We'll just wait here for VJ. I think something good's going to come of this. With regards to small business. So, and by the way, guys, just to clarify, most of these things that we're talking about right now do relate to the SME. So Digitcom's, niche market is what's called the SME in Avaya terms, not the SMB, small medium business. For whatever reason, Avaya calls it small medium enterprise. So when you look at the systems that we sell, for example, the IP Office, it grows from 2 to 384 people, but then the IP Office Server Edition grows to 3,000 people on the Server Edition Select. And the Powered by systems, again, grow to 3,000 people. So we're talking small, most definitely small, medium enterprise. So it crosses into that territory. So the advice I'm giving you, and this is why I talk about doing things on a budget, is generally geared at, at the small, medium business. Because again, I feel you. I understand what budgets are like, and I understand that we don't have big enterprise size, money to throw around. So VJ's come back. I have already business lines, and how many lines should I have? At present, I have 3 lines. It's a great question. I have no idea. So you need as many lines as your maximum number of concurrent calls are going to be. But let me take that back and complicate that for you, because that would be too easy, wouldn't it? All we need to do is figure out, all right, I've got 5 people here. I think I take no more than 3 calls, and so 3 lines is going to be adequate. Sure. But to be cost effective, I look at it and say, I have no problem. Personally, I'm not a 911 call center, right? If 911 call center is your business, you need pretty much, VJ, you lost my voice. Anybody else? Oh. I would say that if you're a 911 call center, for example, people need to be able to get through to you no matter what, okay? But in the case of, yeah, thank you, Hassan. In the case of anybody else, though, generally, I actually figure out what the maximum is, what I would peak at in a month. And I would suggest that, you don't necessarily, unless you got a lot of money, you don't necessarily aim for the peak, but rather you aim for a little bit less than the peak so that you're not overspending. So for example, if I was to run a report on my phone system and trying to figure out where my peaks and valleys are, and I found out that I have 15 calls or so once or twice a month during really bad times or outages. I get 15 concurrent calls at a time. I might gear my system for 15 if I could afford it, but I might back it off a little bit from that if I couldn't. Just knowing that, again, the occurrences of that actually happening are 1 a month. So 1 time a month on that current trajectory, I wouldn't have enough lines for inbound phone calls. And then you got to ask yourself too, is that acceptable? So if it is not acceptable to your customer, that's completely fine too, right? So if it's not acceptable, then make sure that you've got enough lines to do the job. The big question is really, how do I, oh, I've never heard that, Brent. How do I figure that out? And my way of looking at it, it would be get yourself a reporting package. And you don't need to necessarily buy those. Sometimes the companies will give you a demo of a reporting package that you can hook up. For example, we sell a lot at Digitcom of Zima Chronicle software. So and we also sell one called Oak Solutions. What is it called? No, it's Oak Evolve these days. Anyhow, both of them do the same thing essentially. And that is they give you an indication of how many calls, who called in, and what they do, what's called call detail recording. So they look at all of the different records in your phone system. Let me just reject that for a sec. There we go. All the different phone calls in your system, and they give you an indication in reports as to how many you had. And so you could look at those reports. So I guess what I would do is, personally, being a telecom guy and knowing that, I would go out and get one of these products, and at least for a little while, I would do a demo of it, connect it to my system, figure out how many calls I'm doing, and then figure out what I'm paying for lines and seeing if I should be adjusting up or down. A couple more questions and then we should go because I see it's after 2:30. How do the remote work, or how can the remote workers be controlled in terms of working time? That would be an HR question, I think. Like, if you're concerned about them, Liliana, if you're concerned about them calling out, like using your telecommunications software in non-business hours, or if you're talking about them as, say, call center agents, and you just don't want their software ringing or whatever when they're not there, rest assured that it only rings when they log in. So, and I don't mean just into the computer, I mean they log in to the soft phone. So when the soft phone is closed down, just like Danilo's question earlier with the 1X mobile, with 1X mobile, I just either close the app or I put it in night service mode and it goes straight to my voicemail. So I only take calls when I want to. So certainly the agent themselves can control that. You can stop them from being able to call out during certain hours of the day as well if you want, just like I can with the desk phone. You can do the same thing with the soft phone, but I'm not sure if that's what you were getting at. I hope that kind of answers the question. Now, folks, once again, I want to thank you for taking your time to join me. I hope this has been productive for you in the future. So these are some very loose promises, some politician promises here. In the future, I'm 99.9% sure somewhere at the top of my list is different voice technologies or different remote technologies. So I enjoy doing remote technologies on the cheap because I think it just opens people's eyes to what you could do for almost nothing. And I love it. It's just really neat to talk about. People go, wow, you're serious? Yes, you can do that right now. And it's exciting. But what's equally exciting is talking about all the other cool products, the really cool Bluetooth speakerphones that you can get now, the neat collaboration units and that kind of stuff. I never want to seem salesy or anything, but I do want to show you some really neat tech at one of these times. And so those are definitely on the future docket. So folks, thank you again for your time today. And I hope you all took something away from it. All the best. Thank you.